Hello and welcome to Progressive Mindset. We are the podcast for entrepreneurs looking to progress both their mind as well as their business. I am Jason Kemsley.
And I'm Bradley Monday. And today we're going to discuss feel-good leadership. And what does feel-good leadership mean? I think we need to start there.
Please tell me, Brad.
Because if you go and you look for feel-good leadership, different people are using it in different veins, right? We need to talk about what we mean. And for me, feel-good leadership and the topic today is more about, it's not our job as leaders to make people feel good when it's not necessary. Okay, we're here to drive people forward, and sometimes that's difficult. Sometimes that means hearing hard things and working on a plan to drive through the other side. So it's about not doing feel-good leadership, because feel-good leadership actually can have a negative impact in the overall output of your team. You've got a bunch of people that feel great, but actually you're not really achieving what it should be.
If I can just ask some questions to paint a picture here. So many people in business entrepreneurship in the modern era, the last 5 years or so, the rise of social media and people saying what is right and what is wrong, feel like they have to shield their personnel from bad things and only push good out constantly to create a good culture, etc. And what you're talking about is actually there is some hardship, but it's all about where you're heading and the end goal.
Yeah. So, and maybe this is a controversial subject. I didn't necessarily mean for it to be, but particularly when we went into the pandemic, there was this switch, and we talked about it before on the podcast. Is there was this switch from power or control or whatever you want to call it, from employer to employee.
Yep.
And suddenly employers were running scared that they're going to leave, and so they took this weird and different approach where they allowed to
make everyone happy.
Absolutely. And that's right. And what we're talking about today, I think the end result is actually happy, engaged people, but for the right reasons, and actually it works for the business as well as the people. Whereas I think the former, you can be saying to the person that's not really outputting, but not doing bad enough to get rid of, if you're telling them they're doing wonderfully to make them happy, actually that's not going to do well for the team or for the business culture longer term. And I think there's a lot of that out there, and it's very easy to get into because the difficult conversations are difficult to have.
So leaders shy away from those difficult conversations. They shy away from the difficult decisions because during that period you felt like you had to protect or theoretically cuddle the employees from any turbulence that may be going on or the pandemic that was going on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of information out there to the contrary that says that's what you should be doing. And So I guess the reason that I was so keen for us to talk about this topic is because we've been there. I resonate with, actually, when the pandemic came around, we saw the same information, and it was incredibly tempting to go down that route of let's just make sure that everyone feels good. Doesn't matter what they're outputting, what they're contributing to the business. Let's just make sure they're good, because we can't afford to lose anyone.
Absolutely. And I think that in my mind that creates a phrase. It might be something I've heard and I'm stealing, but a healthy business is healthy culture as well.
Mm-hmm.
Typically. So what we're talking about here is business goals, objectives at the forefront, with obviously making sure people are happy, rather than sacrificing that to create happy people, but in turn you don't have a business that's reaching its goals or objectives, so then in turn can't reward in the correct ways, so you still have the negative impact.
You're probably just delaying it for a bit. And to talk about the complete cycle that I think we saw was that, right, let's go down that route of making sure that people are happy. And the pandemic was obviously a new thing to everyone, and so I think it's understandable that we and many others fell into that hole, but that information's still coming through, and I think it's still a prominent subject to talk about. So we went through that cycle of, right, everyone's happy, but then you started to see, hang on a minute, the output's dropping off here. What's going on? Actually, you lost engagement because people weren't rallying behind a cause anymore.
Yep.
And so sharing some of that hardship is important. So I thought today we could talk through Some of the things that we do and that you can use within your businesses to, I guess, take maybe a firm but fair approach where you're sharing the right stuff and you're helping people to drive towards their goals. And sometimes that's hard conversations, and we'll talk through some of that stuff that allows us to actually gain control of what the business needs whilst having happy and engaged
Absolutely.
employees.
And I want to share something to kick us off, because I think this is all about balance. Right?
Absolutely.
Is you mentioned there not sharing too much, but also making sure you share the stuff that people care about to know that we're going in the right direction. There's a business owner I've been communicating with backwards and forwards that's having a tough time. We were talking about some ideas for them the other day, and I won't share who it is, just out of courtesy, because that's not cool. And one of the things I suggested was you might be oversharing. So you've gone completely the opposite direction. You're oversharing too much. And I got a message actually this morning to say over the last couple of days our focus has been much better, and some of my management team is much happier. I've really taken on what you said about not burdening the team with all of the business problems, and it seems to have improved the mood very quickly. So this works in both directions. There is a balance between, hey team, these are the problems we currently face, and hey team, there's no problems, it's all rosy. There is a middle ground, and finding that middle ground is probably the perfection in terms of culture as well.
Agreed. What I would say about sharing problems and that sort of thing with your leadership team is it's your job as a leader to also talk them through finding solutions to those problems. It's not about just going, hey team, we've got a problem. This is pretty doom and gloom, right? You've got to keep that positivity of actually it doesn't matter what the world throws at us. As a team, we're going to come through this, and I'm sharing because we're going to work together to create the outcomes.
Absolutely. So we prepared a list of points, which I think is really good. And to kick off with one of the first ones that I am a big fan of is delivering feedback in a positive manner, and also sometimes privately as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if the feedback has any sort of negative undertones, I completely agree with. That's a private conversation.
Yep. We have praise in public, criticise in private. And
I think we have slightly different ways in which we do this. I'd like for you to talk, if you will, about your leading. You have a thing about leading with some positives, and you kind of lead into actually the constructive criticism, right?
Yep. Yeah, so there's obviously we'll do both ways. So the story is, but a very short version, there was a difficult scenario, difficult to approach character, which is a point we're going to come on to, knowing the person on the receiving end. And I realised my intuitive approach was not going to work. It just wasn't going to work. I would have ended up coming out of the meeting with a worse result than I went, in a worse position than I went in with. And I was doing lots of research, and I think we spoke about it a little bit as well. And it was the concept of start the meeting with praise. Start with, hey, by the way, you're doing this awesome job with this. You're doing these things, and we've moved it forward tremendously. Hey, but what I'd like to do now is talk about the things where we can improve. And that's one way. And I typically use that when I feel the person has an element of self-doubt, or the person has an element of, I've been set up for failure.
Okay.
If they're a confident individual, I don't think you necessarily need to do it in that particular way. So what that allowed was it loosened them up. It showed them that this was not a criticism. Everyone takes criticism in a different way. Yep. I'm quite an emotional character. I can take criticism quite poorly if it's not delivered in the correct way. And that's something I should work on. So it was delivered with a praise first and then critique after.
And I think that helps. You've shared before where actually you don't necessarily always feel comfortable delivering constructive criticism that you don't know how it's going. It's just that awkward, and certainly I understand that. But for me, being a bit more comfortable, and if you resonate with being that kind of person,
just a horrible guy.
I'm more comfortable saying it as it needs to be said. There doesn't need to be any sugarcoating with me, but at the same time, because of the way I'm coming at that feedback, and I'm okay talking about, hey, look, let's start with how it is, and then what I'm doing is I'm going to drive you through really identifying what the problem is here, and helping that individual to understand where their problems are and eke that out, so that actually the end of your meeting is actually this really positive thing with really positive things that you're going to do at the back of it. You've got action points that person can own. Maybe there's some things on you as well that you need to do within the business or within their environment, and then they can drive that forwards. And you really put them... Quite often people will have identified these issues and they don't really know how to overcome them, and that's where human nature will start to finger point. It's human nature to go, it's probably not me, probably somewhere else, right? Absolutely. And so by addressing that, you then start to help someone really take ownership of a problem that they probably already identified, but now they've got the tools to be able to take it forward. And that's the delivering feedback positively, is regardless of how you lead into the constructive criticism, for me, it's making sure you've got those really positive action points out the back that you can both get excited about.
Absolutely, yeah.
To then move on and finish up the meeting.
And that's kind of the reason we do this podcast, right? Is I learn and think more about myself as we talk about these things. I assume you do too. But if you're listening to this episode, maybe you're in your car, maybe you're in the office with headphones on, whatever. Think about, what are you most comfortable? If you're not comfortable delivering bad news, you might prefer my approach of let's ease in with some positive, because then you're going to give a more genuine and authentic version of yourself, which the other person will be able to see. And if you're comfortable delivering the uncomfortable, think about that, and then maybe do it in the reverse. You can deliver it, and hey, we've got this really positive set of outcomes and goals and targets together. And that's the whole purpose of what you're listening to here, is to listen and think, what am I like?
Yeah.
What's the other person on the other side of the table like? Because if we're not cognizant of this stuff, all of the topics we talk about are interchangeable based on your personality type and what you learn about yourself. So this is progressing the mind, that part of the title.
So let's look at the I guess the flip side of talking about how you as the deliverer deliver your feedback. It's important to understand how your team receive that feedback, and you alluded to it earlier, is understanding who sat across the table from you and how they're going to react to what you're putting out is really important as well. And then you can kind of, if they do have that self-doubt that you mentioned and that sort of stuff, it's probably not best to throw it all out there at once, right? That person's the self-doubt's going to grow and that sort of stuff. We need to maybe eke that out a little bit slower.
And a top tip there, I would strongly recommend, if you don't know, you read and look into DISC profiling.
Mm-hmm.
We don't necessarily do it internally in terms of working out where everyone is, but because I've read the DISC profile, I can usually generally categorize someone in an area.
Yep.
And then I know they typically will receive it better in this way or that way, to get a better understanding of them. So that, I think the DISC profile is huge for that. It's a scientific, how you adapt, respond, react, etc. And whilst I'm not going to make a guess here what you may be, maybe a DI or whatever, but that means that then as a leader I can go, okay, I think Brad might better receive this if I structure it in this way, and I'm quite comfortable delivering it in that way, so he's going to get an authentic version of me.
Mm-hmm.
Successful outcome for everyone.
And if you get it wrong,
own it.
And absolutely acknowledge it in the meeting. If you see someone recoil when you give what you feel is very well executed feedback, and they just go, oh, then acknowledge that. Go, I'm really sorry. I think I might have, not delivered that very well. You seem to have had this reaction to it that is not, and talk about
that wasn't the intended.
Talk about what's in the room. rather than trying to gloss over it and just can't wait for this meeting to end on both sides. I think you can come back and you can almost hit the reverse and try again, and you get to know over time. You get to know what that person
what
wants.
works and what doesn't. Absolutely. These next two, we might need to be a bit quicker on, because I think we're going to spend a lot of time on the third one. But taking action quickly, I think, is a huge one. I think a lot of business owners will see, and we've talked about it in a previous episode as well, harnessing fear, etc. Will see a problematic person or a problem. They'll get better, or it'll get better. It's not important right now, and it festers. It molds. It grows. It's like fungus.
People can only fix things that they're aware of, right?
Absolutely. And I'm not suggesting people are fungus, just to clarify.
Okay. But yeah, it's important that they know. If they know something that they do, even if it's someone shaking a leg and you find out that the whole bank of desks is shaking, something trivial like that. If you don't share that that's really annoying, well, that just gets more and more annoying until you eventually snap, right? Getting those things out there. And that's just, obviously a very trivial thing, but I think it's a great one. Everyone's annoyed by that, right? So,
and you have to do it quickly, but as you very well wrote on the board, you've got to be. If you see something, the foot thing is a great example, and you say, "Hey, sorry, the foot's annoying me a little bit. Can you deal with it?" And then they continue, and then you leave it. That's going to become. Everything brews and becomes a bigger problem. So being firm but fair quickly is to take that to a next level. Would you agree?
I do agree, and we had a new manager join our business a little while ago that really does the firm but fair thing, to the point where actually seeing that as an onlooker, there were points where I sort of went, "Oh, I'm not sure how I feel about that," but seeing the reaction from the team, that team know where they stand, and actually it created very quickly a lot of rapport between the manager and the team, and it works. And I think, again, we were very scared of scaring people off because they won't enjoy what they do, and actually people just want to know where they stand.
Yeah.
Which, when you're doing the feel-good leadership thing, is, well, if everything is roses, then nothing is roses, I guess, kind of scenario. Everything smells the same. So
you dilute the.
You do.
Which brings me on to something I think we might disagree a little bit on. Do you maybe want to start on this? Because I need to gather my thoughts.
So the note that I've written here is celebrate real wins, don't celebrate mediocrity. And what I mean by that is you can celebrate small things, but don't go looking for nonsense to celebrate, because again, I think you begin to dilute the things that need celebrating. For example, we celebrate small things like a client says something good about the service and that sort of stuff. I'm saying that's definitely something you should be celebrating, putting out good stuff that people are raving about all day long. It's the smaller things that you're going looking for. We haven't celebrated anything as a team. Let's go looking for something that might have happened.
Yeah, and I don't agree with celebrating things that are not really good. Where I do disagree is if you've had a period of hardship or a periodness of toughness, or the team morale is slightly down. Sometimes as a collective you can take joy in things that otherwise would have not seemed so positive. So what I mean by that is I take for granted that I can get in my car and drive wherever I want to drive to. I was just speaking to an engineer about that. Sometimes if as a business you've gone through a tough period like COVID or whatever, sometimes something that wouldn't have seemed like a win will be received like a win. That wouldn't have otherwise in other times. So getting back together to go and have some dinner or whatever that may be would never have been something that would have been a win that was shared or a big moment. And so just making sure there's always something. I don't going into administration, at least you know where your future might lie. There's always a positive in a scenario. And I think it's important to make that known, even if you don't make a big thing out of it.
And maybe I just separate celebration and celebrating wins with actually you can create positive in a bad scenario, but that should come from you as a leader. You should always see the light at the end of the tunnel. That's your job, and so that's being motivational about, you know what, we're going to go through some tough times. And that's again what I mean by feel good leadership is, hey, we've got a plan. You've either come up with that together or that's something you created yourself. But there's a plan here, and this is what we're driving towards. And, you know, we're going to go through some patches of storm along the way. And that can come across really, really positive. But if you're there going, it's going to get a bit rocky, we better go and find something to celebrate.
Yep.
You know, that's what I mean in that instance.
We might have found a middle ground quicker than I thought, which is why it's so important to talk and listen to podcasts and whatever it is it may be, because actually sometimes we just don't know how to put across what we're trying to communicate. And I think it's fair to say, you know, going through those bad times, we was talking to an individual the other evening that was talking about a science experiment on pressure. Do you recall this conversation?
The stress conversation.
I'd love to quickly just share this. So 100 people were put in a room and they were taught about how stress was very bad for you. They then were given a set task and they performed the task really poorly, and their vitals, their medical vitals, then showed, you know, significant heart rate increases, blood pressure increases. They were overwhelmed. Some of them were sweating, etc., etc. 100 different people were then put in a room, taught for an hour that stress was really good for you, and then given the same set task, and they delivered it significantly better than the previous. Their vitals hadn't changed. In some cases, they got slightly better.
Mm-hmm.
And so that story, that message is important, because how you handle stress or show the pressure or show the challenge at the top very quickly filters down to what it is but beneath you or in the rest of the department or organisation.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that's what we're getting at with the points that we're discussing today. Is it's not about whether things are good, things are bad. It's about how we position those things.
Yep.
And actually that brings us on to, even if they are bad, everyone wants a challenge. So if you're talking about riding a storm and there being light at the end of the tunnel, people rally behind that. Right? They really will, as long as that's done authentically, as you said earlier. So around everyone wanting a challenge, I think not being a feel-good leader and being an honest leader is about making sure that everyone has a far-out goal. Really understand your people. Where are they going? And how do you help them along that road to make sure that there is a plan to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess to piggyback on that, about being uncomfortable and being challenged, that is when your team members grow, that is when your individuals grow, that's when you grow.